Welcome, everybody, to Leo's meditation channel. This is Coach Leo signing in. Today, I want to discuss with you all about a very important topic, and that is, it relates to our brain. This one particular part in our brain called the amygdala. Perhaps you have heard of this term or not, but amygdala is a small almond-looking piece of the brain that sits in the center of our brain system. And basically, what the amygdala is responsible for is it acts as a trigger mechanism. It's like a switch for it to turn on the fear emotion, the anxiety feelings. So when you're feeling afraid or when you're being threatened by an external circumstance, whatever it may be, amygdala is the culprit to make you feel nervous, to feel that fear of whatever that may be. So it makes you feel anxious. So amygdala is responsible for making you feel like that. The reason why I talk about this is because in this modern world, that the society that we live in, even though we're not being chased by lions and tigers like the primitive era or days, we still get threatened by a lot of different aspects or things. And when this happens, we get stressed out and our amygdala gets activated. And when that happens, we feel this extreme amount of anxiety and fear. And actually, if you look at conditions or disorders like panic attacks and things like that, depression, it's all because your amygdala is being activated and it doesn't know how to get turned off or shut down. So it's a big issue. It's a really big issue in today's world. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what amygdala is. How can we better control or manage this part of the brain so that when we are faced with some kind of threat, that we're not going to get so emotional and irrational and lose our minds. So according to the studies, we have a reptilian brain that's, we have the frontal lobe that's been evolved for so many years, and that's what kind of makes us be such a intelligent human beings. Our creativity and our memory skills and imagination skill is just far better than ever before because our frontal lobe has developed and evolved so much. But we still have this hindbrain, the reptilian brain, that is responsible for acting like for us to go into a survival mode when we're being threatened by an external element. So, according to the study, they say that this amygdala is also responsible. It makes us feel rage or anger, strong anger, sadness, nervousness, and things like that. But it's primarily known for us to feel that afraid or that fear, mostly. So it's a survival brain in a way. So, even though that we live in such a high-tech environment and, things are so much more advanced than used to be compared to the caveman days, when we are being threatened and when our amygdala gets triggered, our primitive brain takes over. So, and, when it gets turned on, it just does not know how to shut down. Also, neurologists claim that amygdala divides people into two classes. So what that means is that when a person feels that anxiety or that threat or that fear, we automatically somehow scan the environment, and whoever is friendly, we consider them as friends, and the rest would be enemy or foe because they're like a huge threat to you. So, think of a time when you went to a party or you're at a huge setting where there are a lot of strangers, and let's say you weren't feeling confident, or you were somehow, your amygdala was triggered because of whatever the reason. Remember those moments that where you cannot be so open-minded, you can't just go to somebody and start having a casual conversation because you're afraid. Have you ever have had that kind of experience before? So and if you have, it's because of your amygdala being activated, and so that's a very interesting fact if you really observe it. So without any kind of signal within or from the external environment, if there's no sign of relief, then the amygdala continues to stay on. And if it continues to stay on, because of our frontal lobe, we start to use our creative imagination the wrong way, and we start to catastrophize the situation even more. So we go further into a survival mode, and the amygdala will not shut down. And so more hormones of stress would be released from your body, and so you would only think the way you would feel, which is negative, and so this becomes extremely problematic for the individual. So, if you think about it, in order for people to survive, I started talking about the primitive days, and back then, these people had to always think about how to survive, because it's not a modern day like it is right now, and so they were always hunting for food, and they're running away from wild animals to protect themselves from getting eaten, literally. And so our reptilian brain, the survival brain, always had to prepare for the worst case scenario in order to stay fit and continue to survive, right? So that part of us is still integrated in us. And another interesting information that I wanted to share with you was that they say that this our amygdala learns to do its job from the time we were born until we reach the age of 5 years old. So perhaps, roughly speaking, before we learn to communicate, before we learn to speak the language, our amygdala is fully functional, basically. So in a way, that's why it's really difficult for us to remember clearly the years that we were born until we're like 5 or 6, because those are the years that we couldn't really use speech to communicate with people, especially with our parents probably. But again, the amygdala was there and it was doing this job. So even though we were little infants, we probably felt scared when our mom or dad wasn't around, or when the milk wasn't being fed, stuff like that. And amygdala does not evolve or change after 5 years old, so it still remains the same. The role and the function and its protocol still remains the way it has since you're 5 years old. So it does not, or has not, evolved. So technically speaking, when we feel fear, even though we're grown-ups now, it's like we're going back to being 5 again, because again, we were using our amygdala before we learned to speak. So regardless of how old you are now, when you feel fear, when you are anxious and stuff like that, think of it as if you are going back to being 5 again. Kind of interesting if you put it that way. So how do we turn this thing off, this amygdala? Well, they say that negative emotions lifespan, the duration lasts for roughly about 90 seconds. So, but the problem is, think of a time when we were anxious or afraid of something. I'm sure it lasted more than a minute and a half or 2 minutes. And the reason for that is because we fuel it with negative thoughts. When we feel a certain type of emotion, and I've done this on my other video, explained about it, but there's a loop between feeling and thinking. So when we're feeling certain type of negative emotion, we tend to automatically think about bad thoughts that's equivalent to the way that you feel. So when you're feeling anxious, you would only think about something, a thought that's, that would be very anxious. And so this loop will be created. And So you go from negative feeling to negative thinking and back and forth. So you're trapped in this, this state of kind of catastrophe in a way. So, when your brain or your body is stressed and amygdala is triggered, the brain does not have any room for positive thinking, right? So, it's in a survival mode, and so you're very selfish and self-centered. Why? Because you have to protect yourself, right? So think of a moment when you're driving, and there's a congested road, and let's say you're anxious or afraid of something, or you're stressed out, and this stranger tries to cut in front of you. It'll be very difficult for you to yield and make room for that person to squeeze in. Instead, you'll try to protect yourself and try to block that driver from wanting to come into your lane, right? So what are some of the solutions that we can apply to kind of turn off this amygdala switch? Because obviously this is something that we don't want in our lives, right? Well, one way to do it is obviously to meditate. So you can start meditating, and you can start to, it's going to be hard in the beginning, but you have to remember, you have to build your meditation muscle. It's not like you can go to a gym in a day or two and start creating your six-pack and become fit and all that. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes determination, right? Even in meditation. So you have to learn how to observe your feelings objectively. And you can think of it as if you're reflecting your emotions on a mirror, and you're just looking at it, observe it, and let it just kind of come and go. But again, the key here is if you invite some kind of a thought to that emotion, that's when that 90 seconds will become 90 minutes and even longer. So you have to make sure that you leave the thought out of it. It's not like you're trying to resist the emotion. You can let the emotion enter your consciousness, but by elevating your level of consciousness even higher, you're just observing the emotion and making sure that you have the filter prepared there so that when the thought rises, it'll be filtered out. So that the thought cannot link to that emotion that you're feeling, which the amygdala has triggered. Another solution that you can apply is by raising your consciousness level, you can focus on something that you can be grateful for. So even if you think it's a disaster, you can remind yourself that, hey, things could have gotten worse, Thank God that it's not as bad as it could have been. So think of the positive side too, even though it's going to be difficult in the beginning. As you practice this kind of attitude more and more, it's going to become easier. Another solution that you can take is, of course, you have to raise your consciousness level and start to take in deep breath, because sometimes when you're in fear or when you're anxious, you can't, concentrating on your breathing is like the last thing you will think about. So again, raise your consciousness level and start breathing in and out. Take a deep breath. Why? Because when you're in a survival mode, the oxygen is not being supplied to the necessary parts, especially your brain and your heart. There's not much adequate amount of oxygen that's being fueled to your brain and your heart. So you become tunnel vision, and again, because you're in a fight or flight mode, all your blood gets kind of allocated to your limbs, right? So that's why when you're anxious, that's why when you're afraid of something and you eat a heavy meal, you're going to get indigestion, because the blood that is needed in your digestive system is elsewhere, right? So today we talked about what amygdala is, how it functions, and what kind of problems it can generate for us. We also talked about how we can turn this switch off consciously through meditation and raising your consciousness level overall. So thank you for watching, and please hit that like button. If you can subscribe, that'll be awesome. And so that's all I have for today. I'll see you next time. Take care.